I mean, if anybody wins a Nobel Peace Prize for this, it's going to be Donald Trump and not Tony Blair.
He should have got one for Northern Ireland, frankly. I mean, they did give the Nobel Peace Prize to David Trimble and John Hume. I thought it was a bit mean to cut Tony Blair out of that. So on Monday, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington announced this new peace plan for Gaza, or rather a plan that they challenged Hamas to accept. And there was a supporting role for Tony Blair, who's going to be part of a new authority that is going to oversee Gaza, assuming that this plan is accepted, which is a very, very big assumption. Trump, never one to underplay things, said that this was a path to eternal peace in the Middle East. This is what Trump said.
And most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East. And let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East.
So there's lots to unpack, and it's already been unpacked by lots of other people. But I thought we could focus on a couple of things, couldn't we? I mean, the first is, the essential elements of this plan are quite familiar and quite established, which is the IDF comes out of Gaza. There is eventually a path to Palestinian self-determination, although interestingly, there's not a commitment here to recognize a Palestinian state. But it's quite a big deal for Netanyahu to accept, because it's quite counter to what he's been saying. And it's a very, very big deal for Hamas to accept. So although there are provisions for, an amnesty and a decommissioning of weapons, which sounded to me a bit like Tony Blair's input from his Northern Ireland experience, there's not really a kind of off-ramp for Hamas that most people think they will accept. I guess the question for us both is, we talked about this last week, and Britain's decision, along with others, to recognize the Palestinian state at the United Nations meeting. And I said it was irrelevant, and you said, no, it could actually lead to something. Here's a clip of what we said last week, and we're going to hold ourselves to account. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to change our opinions, but this is what we said.
Is it a gesture? Is it inward looking? Or will it actually lead to something bigger? Is it a moment? This could be a moment which gets forgotten. It could be a moment which starts something. And one of those moments where time will tell.
I mean, I couldn't help but feel it was a bit more of a whimper than a bang. A Palestinian state has never been further away in my lifetime than it is right now.
Are you sure?
Yes, I think so. Because I think...
Are you sure? I think it depends whether Hamas stays in control.
But there's no evidence that they are, losing control. And I would say, the two key countries that are required to recognize a Palestinian state, Israel and the United States of America, have both come off a position they were on just a couple of years ago of seeing a two-state solution as something that they formally supported and wanted to see. So I think I stand by what I said, because I don't think the action by the UK, Canada, Australia, other European nations at the UN made the slightest bit of difference to this announcement. And what I said at the time, I think still holds true, which is the key players in this are the United States, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Hamas. And of course, we haven't heard from Hamas yet. And what is striking, if you read this plan, there's lots of reference to various countries like Jordan and the Gulf countries, and lots of references to Donald Trump. There's next to no reference to Europe. There's one mention of the French. There's no reference to Britain. There's no reference to the United Nations decisions on recognition. And as I say, it doesn't include a recognition or even a path to a recognition of a Palestinian state. If you look at their plan, it talks only in rather sort of Weasley terms that Palestinian self-determination statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people, which is not the same thing as their aspiration. And I'd make a sort of final challenge to you, if you're going to say that, no, it did make a difference what happened last week. Isn't it striking that the British person who has clearly been most influential in all of this is not someone who's in office, not someone who's part of the government, not the foreign secretary, not the prime minister, not the deputy prime minister who was the foreign secretary, but one T. Blair. And he obviously knew a lot more about this, frankly, than Keir Starmer did.
Look, let's come to Tony Blair in a second. And, there's no need for you to be defensive because, it's fine. It turned out there was, in the days after Palestinian recognition, a massive breakthrough. So I was right. But I will agree.
Isn't the economist saying that it's not enough for things to be coincidental? You've got to explain causality.
Of course. And so, one, you are right. For 50 years, and it was the case last week, unless the Americans decide there's a breakthrough and they want it, it was not going to happen. And that's really what happened. Donald Trump decided this was his moment. You are right. The fundamental thing is both the Israelis and Hamas are boxed in badly. They've got no room for manoeuvre. It was humiliating for Netanyahu with Trump to have in his presence in the White House ring up the Qataris to apologise. Hamas are under huge pressure. We'll see what they do in the coming days, but they've really got nowhere to go other than now to acknowledge the truth that they've lost support, they've lost funding. They're going to have to agree to something which essentially wipes them out of the future process. So you're right about that. And nobody's saying that the moment of recognition in the UN from France or Britain made the difference. However, if you look back over the last 2 or 3 months, starting in July, and I think you have to give credit to Macron here, a process begins involving Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, the declarations in July, which Keir Starmer signs up to, the Arab League saying that Hamas cannot be part of the solution. There is then a diplomatic process which is deliberately driving towards the UN week, which involves a number of things happening, including all those statements of recognition. There's alongside that, you're right, a Tony Blair, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law piece of work, which is also going on. But there's no doubt in the UN, there was a sense that this was a moment. Israel's got nowhere to go. Hamas is isolated. The Arab League wants change. Europe is backing it as well. And in that moment, Donald Trump decided, yes, they're right. This is the moment. And I'm going to make the move, which he wasn't making 1, 3, 6 months ago. And his advisor, Vitkov, was also persuaded this was the moment. And I think it's fair to say that process of political pressure around recognition was part of creating the momentum, which was what I was hinting at last week, to reach this moment. And, it's really hard because clearly Netanyahu was then fighting and trying to water down part of what went into that agreement. But they have, through kind of, complicated language, accepted a process which can lead to a Palestinian state, even if they don't want that, and even if they're trying to keep troops on the ground. There's no doubt that the Israel attack on the Qataris absolutely changed the political dynamic within the White House. But I think Macron and Starmer and others saw the opportunity of that shift in the political dynamic, the way the White House was shifting its thinking, and saw them talking about statehood as a way to keep that political momentum going. So I don't think we should underestimate the ability of Britain to act in concert with others to essentially persuade the Americans that this was what they were should do. And it is true to say that Trump and Rubio were saying when Trump was over here in Britain and in the days up to and through the recognition, well, this is just being done for British political consumption or French political consumption recognition. But I think they may have been saying that publicly, but I think actually they were clearly thinking this is part of creating a momentum which is going to be unstoppable, but we now need to lead. And that's what they've done. So that's why I don't think you are right to discount. I don't think it was irrelevant or not material, but I don't think it was the thing. The thing happened in the White House. The thing happened with the mistakes Netanyahu's made.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The attack on Qatar, the failed attack on Qatar, was a very mistaken move by Netanyahu and essentially removed, the sort of benefit of the doubt he was getting from Donald Trump. What about, I think, let's just turn to Tony Blair's role. Isn't it amazing that a couple of decades after he left Downing Street, he emerges as this central figure who's clearly been working behind the scenes on the sort of practicalities, not Palestinians' recognition, which is, an end game, but, how do you actually deliver services on the ground? How do you construct a political authority on the ground? And apart from Donald Trump getting a lot of mentions in this statement from Donald Trump, Tony Blair is singled out, and it is, you have to hand it to him for someone who has sought to stay relevant after leaving office. Think of all the other ex-prime ministers who've got involved in, the UN and various causes, Conservative and Labour, and here's Tony Blair, as relevant as ever.
I think we should give him credit and put it in perspective. Would be the thing I'm going to say. I mean, if anybody wins a Nobel Peace Prize for this, it's going to be Donald Trump and not Tony Blair. But Tony Blair has doggedly, since 2007...
He should have got one. He should have got one for Northern Ireland, frankly. I mean, they did give the Nobel Peace Prize to David Trimble and John Hume, two Northern Irish politicians. I thought it was a bit mean to cut Tony Blair out of that. So maybe he will get a second. Maybe he can be the joint winner with Donald Trump.
I could see the case for Tony Blair getting a Nobel Peace Prize for Northern Ireland. I think it's a stretch to think over the stretch of his career in office and since he's going to get a Nobel Peace Prize for peace in the Middle East. That might be rather jarring. He's been working with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, for some months on their report and getting to rather messy situations with consultancies doing reports which then had to be disowned. A week ago, it suddenly appeared in the newspapers that Tony Blair was going to be chairing this transitional authority. And it is one hell of an achievement to manage to unite Al Jazeera, Time magazine, The Economist, the Financial Times, and a number of commentators around the world all agreeing that the one thing that is not going to work is Tony Blair chairing this authority. But of course,
Donald Trump's going to chair it.
Donald Trump's going to chair it, and Tony Blair is still in there in the mix, and good on him. And if he can have an influence on that, then all to the good, and it will be a reward for years of hard work. But frankly, I would be surprised if Tony Blair is going to be the decisive person in this process. I'd be very surprised indeed, because I'm not sure that the Arab world is going to allow that.
What about a call to you, Ed? I mean, didn't you put in quite a lot of work on Gaza? I seem to remember you helped Gordon Brown with a report all about tomatoes being held up at the customs checkpoints and going rotten as a result.
I think you're talking about the Balls Cunliffe G7 report on economic cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian authorities and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And that was a report which was published and extremely influential for a very short period of time before Hamas then took over. And that was kind of the end of that process of potential economic cooperation.
It's the seeds of the... I think you're underplaying your role. It's the seeds of the... It's not the UK's decision last week at the UN. It's the Balls Cunliffe plan. That,
I'm underplaying correctly my role. I am underplaying the role that Tony Blair is likely to have in the next phase of this. And I think you're underplaying the role that European diplomacy can play in working with Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries to persuade Donald Trump that now is the moment to seize the initiative. And I think that was influential, and he has done. We'll see how this goes, because let's be honest, history would suggest nothing's going to work. But this might be, I'm not sure about eternal, this might be the moment when there is a breakthrough. And it feels like, potentially the most significant moment in the Middle East peace process since the Oslo Accords back in the early 1990s. So, Donald Trump, all power to your elbow, and Tony Blair, you got a seat at the table, it seems.